So disappointing for them. Those handful of seats that they've lost have been picked up by the Tories, the Liberal Democrats, and won by the Respect Party.
Let's go now back to Barking, the final ward, I believe, coming in there. Rachel Amat is on the scene.
Yes, not quite the final ward. There's two more to go, but this is the East Bri ward. It's the last one with a British National Party candidate in, Geoffrey Steed, standing there. There are a number of candidates in this ward, and you may be able to see down there at the end of the hall the returning officer just speaking to the agents from the various parties. That may well be because there is another recount. There has been a number of him. Here comes the returning officer to the desk now. No, he has nothing to say as yet. But so far, the BNP have almost a 100% record. They didn't quite manage to hang on to that, losing one seat, or rather not gaining it, I should say. But certainly, at the moment, the fears of those who thought that they may well take a number of seats off Labour have proved to be right. This, of course, the area where Margaret Hodge, the local MP, said she thought that 8 out of 10 of her white working-class constituents would vote BNP. It hasn't been that bad, but it's been very, very bad for Labour overall, losing those seats here tonight. And certainly poised to lose one more at the moment, although we have no confirmation of that so far, with the returning officer still discussing things with the constituents here. This, of course, for so long has been a very traditional white working class area, but as Margaret Hodge, the MP for here, said, in the past few years, in the past decade, it's seen the most remarkable transformation of anywhere in London. Those are her words. She says there have been such an arrival of immigrant families here that people who've been so used to a very homogenous community now feel that they're being ignored. That is their perception. Although it remains a very white community overall, people feel that Labour has concentrated its thoughts elsewhere. And what has been going on here is a punishment for Labour over the past few weeks, in particular, with the headlines on foreign prisoners coming out into the press, people feeling more and more disillusioned. I don't think we're going to get this announcement imminently. We'll bring it to you as soon as we get it.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. And just a reminder now of our top stories here on Sky News. With results in from well over 100 councils across England, it's been a bad night for Labour. The party has lost seats across the country, with the Conservatives the main beneficiaries. The Tories claim that they will win over 40% of the votes cast. There's also bad news for Labour in East London. In Barking, the BNP has picked up 11 seats, all but one of its candidates announced so far. And let's go back now to Barking and Rachel Amat.
Thank you. I'm Rob Whiteman, the returning officer at this election. Give you the following results for each candidate for Eastbury. Chalice, Diane Patricia, 523.
Liberal Democrat.
Edwards Ryan, 451.
Liberal Democrat.
Manley Patrick John, 546.
UK Independents.
McDermott James Edward, 965.
Labour Party.
McElroy Ashley, 455.
UK.
McElroy Dorian, 425.
UK.
Northover Patricia Ann, 944.
Labour.
Rye Hadail Singh, 852.
Labour.
Sheridan Jeff David, 260.
Green Party.
Steed Jeffrey Richard, 102.
BNP.
Stepton Claire Diane, 131. I therefore declare that James Edward McDermott, Patricia Ann Northover and Hardial Singh Rai are duly elected for the ward of Eastbury.
And the roars you hear there coming from the Labour supporters, and that is because the BNP candidate, Richard Steed, not only failed to take that seat, but indeed got only 102 votes. However, it is small consolation because the BNP here in Barking and Dagenham have taken 11 seats from Labour, and that is a real disaster for them in an area that has so long been their heartland here.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. So 11 out of 13 councillors there for the BNP.
That's a pretty good success rate, isn't it? I mean, privately, before the election, they were hopeful of making 6 gains in Barking. They've almost doubled their own expectations. Without question, the amount of publicity that's centred on this borough has given the oxygen of publicity, to use that phrase, to the BNP. They've they will pick up seats elsewhere in the country.
Ladies and gentlemen,
but with
quiet,
nowhere
please.
near this kind of rate of
Very sorry,
success
it's
that we've seen
getting late
in Barking.
the evening. The result
Let's just
I have just given for Eastbury,
go back to Barking.
I want to check again. Therefore, the vote, the declaration that I've just made for Eastbury, I want to check again. Now, at the moment, we're recounting Longbridge. We are going to attempt to finish this election this evening. Obviously, if we get to the point where, you know, we feel we have to be careful, then I'll say so. But at the moment, we're going to just check the paperwork on Eastbury again, and if it's the right result, then obviously I'll let you know and I don't have to declare it again. So Eastbury, please hold.
Now, this is another problem there down in Barking and Dagenham. We've already got the case of a declared result being withdrawn or attempted to be withdrawn in Birmingham. Now, potentially, we could have the same problem in Barking, and the problem is that legally, once a result's been declared, you can't actually do that. It requires further processes in law, as the Lord Chancellor was explaining to us. Jim Murphy, I mean, this is, very unusual, isn't it, to declare a result and then withdraw it?
It is. I haven't seen it happen twice on an election night, certainly not so in such close proximity, but I'm glad you had the Lord Chancellor before myself and Grant, because he'll have explained it to you in great detail. But I think your commentator there said great cheers from Labour at the BNP losing. I probably suspect that it was cheers from all the political parties, all the mainstream political parties, at another fascist being beaten.
I mean, they are still going to be, Grant, a relatively small party in this country. I mean, they're clearly successful in some pockets, but even in Barking and Dagenham, it's still a Labour-controlled council. Yeah. So wouldn't the best policy be to ignore them?
Well, actually, in a lot of ways, in a lot of senses, you've got a point. And the problem here is that Margaret Hodge stirred up the BNP's chances no end. And I happen to know that a Labour MP not too far away from these declarations is absolutely hopping mad about what Margaret Hodge has done, because she handed the BNP these victories on a plate. And, I can't answer for why on earth she would have done that. They stood in 364 seats, the BNP, out of 4,200, and yet they're getting this huge amount of publicity. And Labour need to take responsibility for that having happened.
I think it's, as I said earlier, Adam, the BNP, the threat of the BNP, they're a tiny minority of fascists who get a foothold, and we have to deal with the issue in the right way. But it's really one-dimensional to say the sort of stuff that Grant's saying. It's a multifaceted approach we need in respect of the British National Party, in the same way with the National Front in the 1970s. And it's simplistic and crass to just blame one party or one strand of opinion.
No, I mean,
I'm not quite saying
he
that.
wasn't. He was making a specific point.
Specific problem.
No, I'm not giving that wasn't
No, he was making a specific point that it had been a mistake to draw attention to it.
I think they've received publicity which they didn't deserve. That's a fair point. But I wasn't kicking Grant or anyone here in the studio. I think a number of commentators offer a really one-dimensional approach as to how you challenge the extreme right in British politics, and it ignores the lessons of the 1970s and other successful challenges to the extreme right here in the UK and elsewhere.
All right, let's go now to John Craig in Hammersmith and Fulham. John.
Adam, a bit of breaking news. Labour are claiming that they have won back Lambeth in South London from the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition. Now, if that is correct, and Labour are saying they have taken back Lambeth, that's a big morale boost for them on an otherwise disastrous night. Labour sources believe they may have held off the Liberal Democrat challenge in Haringey as well. However, here in Hammersmith and Fulham, it's a different story, because Labour are getting a drubbing here already with just a handful of results in. The Conservatives have made 5 gains. They're up to 11 seats already. Tories have only got 2. Some Conservatives here are predicting that a council that was formerly 29 Labour councillors and 17 Conservatives may, by later on today, be as many as 33 Conservative and only 13 Labour. Well, with me is the soon-to-be ex-leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, Stephen Burke. What's gone wrong for Labour here? Is it the fault of John Prescott and Charles Clarke?
Well, it's obviously a sad and disappointing night in Hammersmith and Fulham, and I point to three particular things. It comes on the back of 9 days of bad media coverage, which has obviously had an impact on this campaign. It's also, the results across London are mixed, as you said, Lambeth going to Labour, and it really doesn't show any particular Tory revival. But the third thing, I'm really proud of the record of the Labour Council in Hammersmith and Fulham over the last 20 years. We've seen the biggest fall in crime in the whole of London. We've seen the biggest improvement in secondary school results in the whole of London. We built more new affordable homes in London. And that Labour Council, working with the Labour government, investing in public services, is what the public wants.
You've mentioned 9 days of damaging media headlines. What has been the response of voters here on the doorstep to those damaging headlines?
Well, obviously voters are talking about making a protest, but this is a short-term protest. What we're looking at is the importance of investing long-term in public services. That's what the public want. They want good public services, they want good schools, good hospitals, good police working with their local council, and that's what Labour has delivered in Hammersmith and Fulham over the last 20 years.
But clearly voters must have been appalled by the blunders in the Home Office and the philandering of John Prescott.
Well, it may well be a short-term protest, but the important thing, and the voters in Hammersmith and Fulham will wake up to this, they will realise that they have elected a Tory nightmare council, and it will only take a few weeks before they realise how divided and divisive this Tory party will be. They are a right-wing Conservative party who will make huge cuts in local services. We already know they're going to make £50 million worth of cuts in local services, and that will hit all local people.
What should Tony Blair do now? Should he shuffle his cabinet? Should he resign, hand over to Gordon Brown? What needs to be done to help you and other Labour councillors recover?
Well, that's obviously a decision for Tony Blair, but the government is doing a good job, Tony Blair is doing a good job as Prime Minister, and we need to continue the emphasis on improving public services.
But something's gone wrong, hasn't it? I mean, he's facing a battle over his public service reforms, health and education. We saw the Health Secretary slow hand clapped. Mr Blair had to get his education reforms through the Commons with Conservative support. Clearly, something's gone wrong with the public service reforms, so clearly Mr Blair needs to do something more. Either shuffle the cabinet, bring in new people, or sack incompetent ministers, or stand down himself.
Well, I'm sure Mr Blair will make his own decision, but what we are seeing is huge improvements in school results, not just in Hammersmith and Fulham, but right across the country. Huge improvements in delivery in the health service. Lots of other good things that Labour Council is delivering on, all with low council tax. And that's what Labour's all about: investing in local services and keeping council tax low.
But they're Conservative cheers we can hear. How angry are you and some of your foot soldiers in the Labour Party that the party nationally has damaged you here locally?
We're angry that a Tory council threatens to undermine 20 years of progress made by a Labour council, 20 years of delivering good services, good education, good housing, and policies that really do tackle crime and reduce crime in Hammersmith and Fulham.
Stephen Burke, thank you very much. Well, there you are, Adam. Anger here amongst defeated Labour councillors at the bad, damaging headlines that the government has generated in the past 10 days.
OK, thank you very much indeed, John. You can see there down the bottom of the screen that we've got Labour there just coming up to the 200 losses, 198. Let's have a look, though, at councils which have changed hands tonight. These are councils where the Conservatives gained control, and you can see where they gained them from on the right of the screen. Shrewsbury, Bassetlaw, Chorley, Crawley, Hastings, Coventry, Waveney, Mole Valley and Bexley. And these are councils where the Liberal Democrats have gained control, St Albans and Lakeland. We also saw there reported, as you can see on the screen, that Labour have lost overall control of Lewisham, but also a suggestion that Lambeth they thought they might pick up. So let's just concentrate on those South London areas first.
I'd rather talk about a council where we know the result than one where we're still
all right, well, we know about Lewisham, Michael.
It really follows Bexley. Labour have really taken a pounding in Lewisham. They've lost 15 seats. The Lib Dems have gained 7.
In Lewisham, yeah.
Conservatives have gained 1, but it's really a kind of lab Lib Dem battle. Now, of course, it's no overall control council, but they've gone from 41 seats to 26 seats. From what John Craig is saying, something similar is happening in Hammersmith and Fulham. So what we said at the outcome, at the outset of the night, that Labour's losses will if you like, start to escalate because all of the council seats are up in London, and these are the councils that are now declaring. It certainly appears to bear fruit that that's going to happen now.
And if you look at the pattern of councils changing hands across the country, is anything you particularly draw out of that?
Well, I think what you need to do is to have sometimes to ignore what the national picture is telling you and concentrate on maybe some local issues. So, for example, in Great Yarmouth, which was Conservative controlled, the Conservatives lost that, and sometimes there will be a reaction against the party that controls the council for some local reason that won't have been picked up in the national media. The Conservatives also lost control of Hart and of West Lindsey also, so it's just local stories there. We've seen also in Barking, obviously, tonight, the protest vote not necessarily switching to one of the mainstream parties, but going to, in this particular case, to the BNP.
But is it possible to say that there are parts of the country where the Conservatives are stronger and weaker in terms of their recovery? I mean, obviously they're starting from different bases.
No, I think if I were asked to sort of comment on the Tory performance tonight, I'd have to say it's been extremely good. Right? They've improved in terms of vote share. They've improved certainly in terms of councillors, albeit they're starting from a high base anyway. They control more council seats and more councils than any other party. So to make the kind of gains that they're making tonight indicates a very good performance by the Conservative Party.
Are you drawing anything from the pattern of the voting?
I think one of the patterns is there's no real pattern. I think there's as Michael's saying, this patchwork of terms of all over the country, a combination of local and national issues. But Michael's point, the Conservatives are doing a lot better. I think doesn't bear examination in terms of the vote share. I mean, William Hague, I think, got 38% of the vote, and even the most optimistic at the moment in terms of the Conservative share of the vote is about 40%. So it's 2% up on William Hague, where William Hague was. So that's not a dramatic breakthrough without any gains in Manchester, Liverpool or Newcastle. So it is a difficult night for Labour, we know that, but it's not the breakthrough. And there's a pattern, if there is one, it's a pattern of north-south, in fact. Okay. The Conservatives aren't making the breakthroughs in the north that they would have expected.
Jim, with respect, you're in danger of sounding just like the sort of Conservative politicians of the 90s, trying to explain away why the losses weren't quite as bad as they were all predicting. But in fact, they're blooming, lousy. And this is a bad set of results, as you said, for yourself. But it's actually a very good set of results for us. It actually vindicates the way that David Cameron's been leading the party in a sort of moderate mainstream fashion, and it shows that what people want is a serious alternative, a party that looks like it can form a government, and all of those things have come through and been shown in the votes.
In terms of forming a government, you cannot form a government on a 40% share of the vote in a mid-term of a government.
That's true. I should remind you that you without any 36%.
Without any victory in Manchester, Newcastle, Liverpool, and still have been a wasteland in Scotland and in Wales. It just cannot happen. It's not credible. You can't put an electoral map together that gets you a government without any gains in those areas.
So if you come in with less than a quarter of the vote tonight, but you still think it's credible that you can form a government, I'm sure if we come in at 40%, then in 3 or 4 years' time, it's perfectly credible for us to form a government.
Look, in the last local elections in 2004, we got 26% of the vote. We still went on to win the next general election. I'm not saying that this hasn't been a difficult set of elections because of the national picture, and Steve from Hammersmith pointed that out. It's a difficult set of elections, I'm not denying that, but we're nowhere near saying the Conservatives have made the breakthrough that they need to make to form an alternative government.
Okay.
They just aren't.
You're watching Vote 06 here on Sky News, and with the majority of results now in the council elections across England. This is the situation so far. As we can see, the Conservatives have gained net 179 seats. Labour have lost just under 200, 198. Lib Dems more or less flatlining. They've lost 9 so far. And there have been 28 gains by others and independents, including, we now know, 11 gains out of a potential 13 for the British National Party in Dagenham and Barking. Well, amongst those councils likely to change hands, Hammersmith and Fulham, which will be run by the Conservatives for the first time since 1968. Overall, the Conservatives say they expect to win 40% share of the vote. There's also bad news for Labour in East London. In Barking, the BNP has picked up 11 seats, and the Prime Minister is now expected to announce a reshuffle later today. he will be calling members of his cabinet into Downing Street this morning to put together a new team. Well, London is, of course, really the key battleground tonight, and Martin Stamford has been keeping an eye on some of the crucial races there.
Yes, almost half the seats were contested in the capital that were... Sorry, almost half the seats contested right across England that were actually up for grabs were in the capital. So let's focus on it, on that battleground. This is the old political map of London, which we can show you, which now is going to have to change. As you can see, Labour holding nearly twice as many boroughs as the Tories, with 3 for the Liberal Democrats. So at midnight, we wiped that map back to its white state, and we can now start to fill in the details for you. This is what has happened so far tonight. Right, Bexley, down here, they have got a Conservative gain from Labour, the Tory up 24 seats, Labour down 23, so they have to chalk that up as a victory there. Harrow, just the other side of the map, that's on the northwest side of London, that is a Conservative gain from no overall control. Wandsworth, that's down a familiar council right there in just south London, south central London. That is a Tory gain, one from Labour there. Westminster, as you might imagine, you can see it flashing blue, stayed Tory blue. Kensington and Chelsea too, that particular council is also Tory and staying Tory tonight. Labour losing 3, Conservatives gain 3 there. Sutton Liberal Democrat hold, but sort of only just in the sense that they lost 10 councillors there. Conservatives gained 14, Labour lose 3 and the Independents lose 1 in that particular council. Labour have lost Lewisham. That was one of the other headlines of the night. That's gone to no overall control. Lib Dems lose 15 seats there. Liberal Democrats up by 10. So that's just some of the colouring in of London. And we know that some of the the counting is still going on, and we should get those results over the next hour or so. Adam?
Michael, that really does point to, in London, pretty massive traffic in terms of changes of seats.
Yes, because there's scope for it there, and you know, we were talking just before that in terms of what the pattern is, and we see 2 London boroughs, Lewisham and Sutton. Sutton held by the Lib Dems, but the Lib Dems have lost a lot of seats to the Conservatives. Lewisham, it's Labour that have lost seats to the Liberal Democrats. So in one part of London, the swing is going against the Liberal Democrats. In another part of London, not too far away, it's going in favour of the Liberal Democrats. So very much a kind of local campaigning effect, and presumably people are responding to local issues and the management of the council. So it's good for the health of local democracy, but it's difficult to kind of discern a clear pattern. That said, I would take issue with the whole business of how well that the Conservatives are doing from Labour's perspective. I think it's an enormous psychological boost to the Conservatives if they can make this 40% national equivalent vote. They're not going to get 40% of the vote tonight. It's when we do projections.
Right, there we are. Labour losses now have hit 200.
Right. So it's Labour's losses which will be a kind of key psychological marker. And if they go above 250, and we've said that's a terrible result for Labour, then obviously that puts pressure on the government and the Prime Minister in particular. And for the Conservatives, if they can demonstrate that they have indeed got a national equivalent vote of around 40%, that will be the first time for a long, long time that they've reached that particular mark. Now, OK, Labour is right to say, well, this is after a very difficult time for the government and so on and so forth. But the boost for the Tories to get to that psychological barrier, I think, is going to be enormous.
And just to clarify this issue, in case anyone is confused, what the Conservatives are claiming is that they will hit 40% equivalent share of votes.
Yes.
There is also the percentages which we're giving on the screen sometimes. That is simply the percentage of seats which each party has taken.
Indeed.
Although the two, as we get more results, should converge towards each other, pretty much.
Well, they should be telling the same story in terms of, and they are indeed telling the same story, because the Conservative share of seats, albeit from a high base already, has gone up, and Labour's has gone down. And the other part, if you like, the other part of the story that perhaps we're neglecting to some extent is what's happening to the Liberal Democrats.
All right. Now, we saw embarking earlier on a declaration that was then withdrawn by the returning officer. He's now explaining the situation.
We have found a straightforward clerical error, which unfortunately does affect the result. Now, clearly one mistake has been made this evening, a clerical mistake. I do not want to be in the position of now compounding that by making a second mistake in relation to the law regarding what happens when the declaration takes place, but a clerical error has then been discovered. Therefore, as returning officer, I have discussed with the election agents that I'm reserving judgment on this matter. I will seek legal advice in the morning, as will the two agents, and the matter will be resolved in the morning following legal advice, when I will make a final statement with regards to the position in law regarding a clerical error found after the declaration. I hope that's straightforward. As I say, it's late in the evening, a clerical error has been made. I don't now want to compound that with a second error, so we are drawing that to a conclusion for this evening, and we'll deal with it tomorrow. I now have the final declaration of the evening in relation to Bri Ward. I, Rob Whiteman, the returning officer at this election, give you the following results for each candidate for Longbridge. Birchall James Jeremiah, 701. Chitry Anthony Bryan, 910. Cleland Lawrence Norman, 588. Cook Brian, 1,227. Cook Margaret Ann, 1,111. Gill Nirmal Singh Sher, 1,253. Gil Sukhinder Singh, 1,272. Richards Anthony John, 1,072. Vincent Gerald MacDonald, 1,233. I therefore declare that Nirmal Singh Sher Gill, Sukhinder Singh Gill, and Gerald...
All Labour. Well, I mean, just to explain what was going on there, we've actually seen the same thing happen in both one ward in Birmingham and one ward in Barking and Dagenham, which is basically that a result has been declared by the returning officer, who then subsequently has come back and said there's been a miscount. Now, the returning officers are saying in both cases that they will revisit the matter tomorrow. We've got some bad news for them. According to the Lord Chancellor, Lord Falconer, who was here earlier on, the only way that you can reverse a declared result is by getting a further legal instrument to overturn it. So that probably means that for some days at least, the council seats in those particular wards are going to be in abeyance. It's
quite astonishing that we've had two outside broadcasts, both covering live declarations, and then both on two occasions they've come back and said there's been an error, and therefore we'll have to put the result in abeyance and then revisit it after some legal advice. I can't remember ever that happening before.
Well, of course, there is the case of Winchester, which was a very close result in the general election. They actually ended up having a by-election there.
That's right, and because they said if you remember, it was the Lib Dems that had won it by just 2 votes,
yeah.
And Jerry Malone, the City MP, challenged that, so they had to have a rerun of the election, which of course the Conservatives lost heavily. But of course, some revenge there tonight. Conservatives have gained from no overall control of Winchester Council.
Mm. Well, very interesting. And peculiar. Well, we're now joined by David Laws. Well, let's go back, before we come on to David Laws, to one of the BNP candidates, who was Richard Barnbrook, who I believe was leading his party's efforts in Barking and Dagenham, and he joins us now. Mr. Barnbrook, well, first of all, your reaction to this extraordinary situation of a declared result and now being disputed. Does that involve your party?
Yes, it does. What happened here is a clerical mistake that the returning officer nominated us with 102 votes. What the actual vote was, I spoke for the returning officer now, a bit tired of tea, was 1,102 votes, which puts us again on the top of Eastbrook Ward. So in effect, it's 12 seats. But obviously, going through the legal procedures, a mistake has been made, as the returning officer had mentioned. We're quite happy to sit back until he has legal advice tomorrow and actually then passes over the vote to us. I hope we don't have to go through a legal mishmash of finances being spent. It'll simply be he'll go to his legal advisors and then pass the seat back over to us.
Right, I think legally he can't do that, but that's for another day. I think there will have to be some kind of involvement of the court. We see the Conservatives, incidentally, have gained the borough of Islington there, Michael. But just to come back to the British National Party embarking, obviously a strong performance by the party in the wards which you contested. What do you think the message of that is?
I think the message is quite simple, that Labour at the moment are hemorrhaging at the side with the mistakes going forward, health service, the release of 1,000+ asylum or illegal immigrants on murder, rape, pillage, whatever it may be, and also the fact of Mr Prescott running around a bit too wildly. This is actually damaging the Labour Party centrally. Here in Barking Dagenham, it's a simple direct vote now, not a protest, a direct vote. I had 400 telephone calls today from other parts of the borough of Barking Dagenham asking me where the candidates were, Right, my view is if we had actually stood 40, we would have taken this house without doubt. We need 26 seats.
You didn't know, did you?
We got 12 out of 13. No, we didn't.
Why didn't you?
It's a new party in Barking. The reason this was, it's a new party in Barking Dagenham. It's only been going for 3 or 4 years. So obviously, for candidates to come forward, it was a bit difficult. It wasn't until statements from ourselves, canvassing, and Margaret Hodge's beautiful gift to us, that the people in Barking Dagenham now, in fact across Britain, are no longer frightened to say, oh, I'm considering, I might possibly vote BNP. They're now standing up and saying, I'm BNP.
And how important do you think race was to the success of your candidates?
Absolutely nothing whatsoever. Margaret Hodge said, 8 out of 10. My view at the beginning of the day was, or last week was, maybe 6, 7 out of 10 might. But what has happened in the campaigning here, and this has been geared on by the media, but it's things we always do ourselves, is I said that 1 or 2 out of 10, first, second, third generation Afro-Caribbeans, blacks, Africans, Asians and minority groups have simply come across. This is not a fallacy aspect. I'm speaking to people on the streets, in corner shops, in supermarkets, saying this race concern, this nonsense doesn't exist. It's law and order, education and proper housing.
But yours is a racist party, isn't it? Because it does say that the white races in this country have a greater investment in the national heritage than other parties.
Well, I don't believe that's the case. If that's in translation from yourself of our manifesto, it may need to be read a bit clearer. What we're actually saying here is that the actual nonsense programme and open door policy and immigration doesn't help anybody. Those have been here in the generations going back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and actually those that maybe come from the 60s, and particularly those that have been here for generation after generation.
All right, and you want quotas to ensure that no race is overrepresented in jobs like running market stalls or taxis or late night food. I mean, food stalls. I mean, that itself is also racist, isn't it?
Well, quotas on what way? What quotas on? You can't have certain people opening shops up? Or
well, you say you don't want ethnic minorities overrepresented in those jobs. That is surely a racist policy.
Well, I think maybe the comment comes back in another direction. Maybe it is someone that has the ability to do the job should be done, have the job given to them by their ability, rather than some political correctness of simply saying that quotas must be laid down.
Well, wait a minute, hang on. Are you saying that the state should hand out jobs like being a minicab driver or running a market stall or running a late night food stall according to race? Because that's surely the only way in which you would get the sort of balance you're talking about. Well, that's your policy.
What I seem to be understanding from your comment, no, I don't think it is.
It is. I mean, I've read your manifesto. That is your policy.
Then maybe you've translated it your own direction. I'm actually on the advisory council here. I know exactly what the policy laid down. What it's saying is there should be no particular reason that political correctness or even positive discrimination
that's a different
should be given over by giving quotas down.
Sorry, let's get this clear. That is a different policy. That's a different policy. You say you're against positive discrimination, but you also say there should not be ethnic groups overrepresented in those categories of jobs which I've listed. And I'm simply putting to you that that is unavoidably racist.
No percentage. These particular, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is positions within this should be proportional representational of the people actually here.
But therefore that requires government intervention, and it requires the allocation of jobs according to race, doesn't it?
No, not at all. What it simply requires is the fact that people must govern themselves. There's no government to govern this.
OK, you are now, I think, probably the leader of the opposition on your council. Yes. What are you actually going to do?
Well, the first thing is we'll actually set up a meeting in the next 3 weeks. We estimate between 500 and 600 people turning up, and then we let them decide to make the policies what they feel we should do on their behalf. If there are more people turn up to this meeting, the more the merrier. We're not going to sit in some ivory tower dictating to people in Barking and Dagenham what policy is best for them. Also, I will go through the council and probably be suspended on a constant basis. I'm not there to shake the hand of the council. We're not in the position to take authority. We're not
well, you've just been elected as a councillor.
Statement. Well, yes, of course. My position as a councillor is to go there and represent the people. If I have to go in there and go for this apparently nice little situation of not leaking out information because it's privy only to the council only, then I'll leak out every single document I can that benefits the community. If that means I'm suspended constantly, then so be it. I'm not here to shake the hands of councillors.
Right, so basically, you're saying you've been elected as a councillor, but you're actually quite prepared not to do the job.
No, oh, excuse me, I don't think I said that at all. I said, well, I'll be doing
if I'm constantly suspended, it's not a problem. Well, if you're suspended, you can't do the job, can you?
Well, if I'm doing the job, there's like another 10, possibly there's another sort of 12, 11 people behind me. I will be there as the voice of the people. If I find out there's corruption going on or work's going on behind those closed doors and not open to the public, I will simply let that information out. If it means that I'm constantly being suspended for having to take the role of doing that, I have my other councillors behind me, quite happy to continue where I'm there. I will not sit back now, the people of Barking Down have spoken, and simply let them be rushed over again, as Labour's been doing for the last, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years.
Thank you for joining us, Mr Barnbrook. Let's go now to Hammersmith and Fulham, where the final result is in at last. John Craig.
23, actually. Yes, Adam, the Tories have reached the magic figure, which I think was 23 councillors. They've done it with plenty to spare, actually. Just a very brief postscript to your interview there with the BNP. There was one BNP candidate in Hammersmith and Fulham. In the Fulham Broadway ward, he polled just 236. But it's the Tories who have absolutely romped home, turfed Labour out of power, and the Tories now have control of Hammersmith and Fulham for the first time outright since 1968. The new leader of the council, Stephen Greenhalgh, is with me now. Like David Cameron, he was 1 year old when the Tories last had control of Hammersmith and Fulham. Congratulations. What did you say to the voters here to persuade them to vote you in such big numbers?
Well, it's been a big local concern around value for money. We have the second highest council tax bills in inner London, and Labour weren't delivering value for money, and they could look at other neighbouring Conservative boroughs that were delivering lower council tax bills and high quality services, and they wanted some of that for Hammersmith and Fulham. So we campaigned for positive change.
It's been a good night for the Tories all round, in large parts of London particularly. Inevitably, I guess, the bad headlines, Mr Prescott, Mr Clark, and the turmoil in the Labour government must have helped you. To what extent do you think you climbed on the anti-government bandwagon? It was a protest vote to a certain extent.
Well, I think in some respects Labour would have found it difficult to get out their core vote, clearly, but our vote was motivated anyway without those kind of scandals. Remember, we've had a history of electoral success in Hammersmith and Fulham. One of the best general election results last year, 7.5% swing. A by-election result again, 7% swing. Tonight we're seeing swings of 8 or 9%. So this is all a trend that we've seen for some time in Hammersmith and Fulham. So it's a mandate for real change. The residents of Hammersmith and Fulham had simply had enough of a very tired, poorly run Labour council.
Stephen Greenhalgh, thank you very much, and congratulations once again. There we have the new leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council. The Tories have absolutely romped home here, Adam.
Thank you very much indeed, John Craig. Also hearing claims from the Conservatives, indeed from Grant Shapps, that Conservatives believe they've taken Ealing as well, Michael. I mean, it does look as if London is going pretty blue.
Indeed, and Labour's suffering quite a lot, serious losses, although the result in Merton would please. Although they've lost control of the council, the Conservatives haven't gained that. But in Hillingdon, which the Conservatives controlled on a minority administration, Conservatives have made significant gains there. They've also gained control, of course, of Harrow, which we noticed earlier. So certainly around the fringes of outer London, the Conservatives have a very good...
Can I mention, though, that there's a picture of London going away from Labour. It's not necessarily going blue. I mean, the results I've just had through recently suggest that Labour has lost both Camden and Lewisham, and we've made 13 gains in both of those areas, including knocking out the Tory leader, incidentally, in Camden. So big gains there for us, and
but overall,
largely at Labour's expense.
But overall, if you look at the Lib Dem performance, I mean, you have flatlined. You've held your position tonight.
Well, if you look, I mean, as was mentioned earlier on, there are always big local variations in a situation like this. If we step back and look at the big picture for the three parties, it looks like this. I mean, this at the moment is on track for being our best set of local election results, almost in the party's history, in terms of share of the vote and number of councillors. For Labour, this is a big loss of councillors. They had something like 11,000 in 1996. They're going to be left with not much more than 6,000 after tonight. And for the Tories, I would rather disagree with the analysis we heard earlier on. I mean, the Tories were at 38% in 2000 under William Hague. They went on to get pounded in the general election. They failed to win any seats today in the big cities, Liverpool, Newcastle, Manchester, Sheffield. This is not a party that is heading back into national government by any means.
OK, Michael, well, before we come on to the other parties, let's just talk about David Law's own party, the Liberal Democrats. He says one of their best set of results ever.
Well, yes, possibly. I mean, Richmond is yet to declare, but you've said that you're going to get that. But, of course, in Sutton, you've lost seats where you run the council. You've lost.
And we had a massive majority there.
In Norwich,
it was virtually a one-party state in Sutton, so we're still
Norwich,
in control.
You've lost seats in a council where you pushed very strongly. You were targeting. In Newcastle, you've also lost seats. So it's not a terribly good story. And in terms of the overall seat gains and losses, you're nowhere near the kind of figures that...
I've accepted there are local variations, but we're getting the London results through now, which are extremely good for us. And if we look at this big picture issue, which is what you took us back to earlier on, I mean, you have accepted that in terms of vote share and number of councillors, this is going to be pretty much the best night in the party's history. And this is not a Conservative party,
Michael,
which is heading back into power.
Not in terms of our current projections.
Vote share, though?
No.
Well, it may be 1 point off what we achieved last time, but this is pretty much...
That's not the best ever, then,
it's pretty much the best result in the party's history.
Adam, David's normally a very reasonable guy, and I don't like to sort of shout him down, but they have lost 19 councillors net. Labour have lost 218. We're up by 207. How that could possibly be spun as the best result ever and wonderful for you. You control... you had 55 councils at your height. You now control, what, 32 councils? Something
we've
like
gained
that?
councils tonight. But do you accept as a reasonable man that if the Conservative Party was heading back into power, you would not be in fourth place in vote share behind the Greens in Liverpool? You would not have failed to win seats in Liverpool, in Manchester, in Sheffield, in Newcastle.
We've said
this
all
is
along,
not a party which is heading back into national government.
We've said all along this is a long programme. I mean, David
it's going to be very long at this rate.
Wait a second. David Cameron's just been in power for a few months. We said all along the party has to change. It's going to be a long programme. What tonight proves is we've made a very, very good start.
He's going to be a pretty old man by the time he gets to power.
Not as old as Ming will be, if you don't mind me saying.
I watched the Liberals and the Tories squabble, and I was in Lambeth all day today, and they obviously ran the council in a coalition. It's hard to see how they could, but they ran the Lambeth in a coalition, and the prediction this evening is that Labour will now run that council. It's yet to be confirmed, of course, so there's a different pattern of events across the city.
That's a very tiny crowd.
Where David is right is that the Conservatives cannot, with any genuineness, claim that they're on the march to forming an alternative government. On the basis of tonight's result, you're less than 2% up on what William Hague achieved, and that's not a party that's about to form a government. William Hague was one of the least successful.
We'll have to leave it there. We are coming to the end of the flow of tonight's election results. Stay with us here on Sky News. You're watching Vote 06, and with the results in from nearly three-quarters of the councils in England, it's been a bad night for Labour. In the last few minutes, the Conservatives have won control of Hammersmith and Fulham for the first time since 1968. So far, Labour has lost over 200 seats nationwide, and in Barking, the BNP has picked up 11 seats, though, as we've been hearing, at least one further seat for the BNP is being disputed. Following tonight's results, the Prime Minister is expected to announce a cabinet reshuffle today. He is likely to call ministers into Downing Street this morning to put a new team in place. Well, Martin Stanford's got a full rundown of the latest situation.
Yes, on that reshuffle, Frank Dobson, I was just reading, has just been saying, never mind reshuffling the officers on the deck of the Titanic is something like a reshuffle for the Blair government. Time for a change of leadership, he's been saying. Many people might agree with that. Let's just see how the statistics break down then on the state of the parties. This is the way we're going by council so far. Net change of 11 for the Conservatives, Labour losing control of 13. Liberal Democrats would have hoped for better than that. They're up on a net gain of 2, and the other parties, no change for them. But that's the number of councils they've got. If we switch that around to councillors, the number of seats involved, here we are with the statistics. We're approaching the end of them, but a few more of the crucial London boroughs to declare. This is the progress that David Cameron has made, and we'll be delighted by that. The rubric we put in is he had to get at least a net gain of 100. He's done twice that, net gain of 207. And for Labour, well, they've been sort of telling everybody, look, we're going to lose 100 seats net. You know, we understand that. Look, it's worse than that. Net loss, 229. So into severe worries for them, I would imagine. For the Liberal Democrats, in terms of seats, net loss of 8, so that's disappointing. They would have hoped to have done a little bit better. In terms of proportion, percentages and so on, let's just check this out. Share of the seats, 40.1 is the way the Tories have done tonight, 31.4. This is in share of the seats. The vote data will come out in later today, I guess. 22.2 share of the seats for the Liberal Democrats, the other parties 6.3. How has that changed since the last time these local elections were fought on an equivalent basis? +3 for the Tories, down 3.3% for the Labour Party. That's the story of the night. It's almost equivalent. Lib Dems not making any gains, other parties making some headrow. Now, we haven't got exact votes, of course, and this wasn't a representative poll in the sense that it wasn't a national poll. No Scotland, no Wales, no Northern Ireland. It was only parts of England. But if we took the voting intentions that were demonstrated by the electorate yesterday and put them into the House of Commons, this is the sort of thing we'd get. The Conservatives would now be sitting on this side of the House with 320 MPs. Short of an overall majority. We'll tell you about that in a moment. 232 for the Labour Party on the opposition benches once again. Liberal Democrats on this extrapolation disappointing, around about where they are now on 62. Other parties have got 32. We'd have no overall control, which we call a hung parliament on a national basis. The Tories just 4 short of any kind of forming a parliamentary majority on the basis of the voting intentions that we saw yesterday being repeated for a general election, which in theory is maybe, 4 years away. Adam?
Thanks, Martin. One further council coming in as Martin was speaking there. Labour hold the London Borough of Haringey. Disappointment that for the Liberal Democrats?
Yes, although Labour have lost quite a lot of seats there, Adam. They lose 11, the Lib Dems gain 11. But remember, the general election, Barbara Roach's Labour seat of Hornsey and Wood Green was lost to the Liberal Democrats. I think they targeted Haringey and they talked about winning control there, but I was always surprised by that because Labour has some very large majorities. That's certainly a big swing from Labour to the Liberal Democrats for that number of seats to change hands. So.
Well, of course, one of the stories of the night has been the performance of the BNP, in particular gains made in Barking and Dagenham. And Rachel Amat is there. Rachel.
Yes, the story from here in East London is that the BNP has gained a foothold in the capital with at least 11 and possibly 12 seats won from Labour. The reason there is some confusion over that, as the returning officer has just been explaining as they packed up here, is that there was a clerical error and 1,000 votes were accidentally knocked off one of the BNP candidates. They know that he should have won that seat, but the returning officer has said one mistake's been made. He doesn't want to make another, so they will wait until the morning and see whether legal action is necessary to get that seat reinstated. But certainly this has been a terrible night for Labour here in Barking, fulfilling pretty much their worst nightmares. There were 13 BNP candidates here, and as I say, 12 of them have got back with seats. One of them still waiting on a legal challenge for that to be confirmed. But this very much what Margaret Hodge, the local MP, feared when she said that she believed as many as 8 out of 10 of her white working-class constituents would turn their back on Labour and consider voting for the British National Party.
Well, Rachel, thank you very much indeed. That, of course, one of the dramas in London. Let's have a look at the overall map of the nation's capital, where half of today's voters were in a position to cast their votes, 32 boroughs in all, Michael. And, of course, this is the pattern we see there. Talk us through it.
I'm sorry, Adam, I was...
Oh, right, sorry. You're doing your maths. Well, yeah. That's Bexley out there, which we see
right, well,
has gone from Labour to the Conservatives.
That was a big swing there. That's,
Adam, can I just come back for 1 second on the Haringey?
Well, we'll get on to Haringey in a minute. Let's just complete this.
Right, that's Harrow. Con game from no overall control. I mean, it's in the outer London suburbs, Hillingdon. Conservatives have gained overall control. You have to. My geography in London is none too clever without any kind of.
Well, we're seeing there Labour going to no overall control. That's Lewisham.
All right.
Liberal Democrats lose overall control of Islington. That's a new one. Perhaps we'll hear from David Laws on that. And now we're seeing Westminster, Wandsworth, Kensington, all solid Conservatives. Lib Dems there holding on. Sutton, although losing seats. There's Haringey there. Labour have held that. Liberal Democrats losing Islington, as we were saying there earlier on. So a good deal less red on the map, really, Michael.
Oh, well, Labour expected to lose quite a lot of those councils because, in fact, the Conservatives have outpolled them 4 years ago anyway, so they would have resigned themselves to losing control. What I don't think they would have resigned themselves is losing so many seats to the opposition parties. And that's the problem, because it means any fight back that they've right. now got to mount has to be that much.
David Laws, North London, you've got Islington, and you've got Haringey. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, interesting results for us across London. We've had some massive gains. Lewisham 13, Camden 13, Haringey 11 gains, and apparently our vote share there actually higher than Labour's, so that's extremely impressive. We're obviously very disappointed to have lost Islington, because Islington Council is one of the fastest improving councils under the Lib Dems in the entire country. Unfortunately, we inherited a real mess in relation to that council, and they had to take some pretty tough financial decisions, and my guess is that in some very close battles they've paid the price for that, which is disappointing. But across London we've been making real gains against Labour.
You've lost 14 seats in Islington.
Yeah, and that's very disappointing in Islington, but very good gains elsewhere.
One of the patterns about the Liberals is that in London, as in some other places, but certainly in London, wherever the voters have an experience of the Liberals running a council or running anybody.
How about Liverpool?
They would throw them out. In London, we have the situation in Islington, where a substantial losses, the situation in Lambeth, where you've now lost control of the council to Labour. And at the start of this evening, Lord Razzle, the election supremo for your party, was asked for one prediction. And his one prediction was that you would win Southwark handsomely. Now, we still haven't got the Southwark result, but I don't think that's happened either.
Well, we haven't got it, and in places where people have experience...
So the pattern there is, whatever there's in London, certainly, whatever there's Liberal running a council...
No, I don't think so. I mean,
the voters realise that the promises are empty.
Look at Sutton. In spite of the fact that we started off with virtually every seat on the council and have lost some, we're still in control there, and we've been in control there for a very considerable period of time.
There is a degree of pattern there, that where you have had a foothold of responsibility, the voters don't enjoy it.
It won't surprise you to know that I don't
Right, let's have a look at the overall balance of councils and seats changing so far in London, where we've had declared. Interesting pattern there. We see the Conservatives have gained control of 4 councils and net have gained 16 seats. Perhaps not that dramatic. Labour have lost 115 seats and lost control of 4 councils. Liberal Democrats, interesting, lost control of 1 council and lost 13 seats, and there we see no overall control picking up.
It's got to be an error.
Yeah, because the seats...
it should be 116, I suspect,
Yes, I think, Adam, I think the...
Conservatives gained 116. I think
electronics are conspiring against
electronics, well, it is late in the night. They've been obviously tired, but this is a share of seats there, and that's obviously confirmed. over half the seats so far.
Yes, and don't forget that in the 2002 London election, the London borough elections, Conservatives actually got 0.1% more than did Labour, but won 200 fewer seats.
Yeah.
And what you've found tonight is that the swing in vote share towards the Tories has really helped them in terms of.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point.
Benefit
I mean, I think,
seats.
roughly speaking, in terms of change in share of seats, which, I mean, the magnitude in London is 10%, whereas we're talking about a magnitude across the country of 3%. So it's a much bigger effect in London. Yeah,
because of a whole council election means many more seats at stake, and that's why you can get these very big turnarounds in terms of seats, and why we said, you know, when Labour was on about 150 losses, that would really escalate when the London results came in if they were bad for Labour, and they are bad for Labour.
Adam, if I can sort of chip in. I mean, I think this is genuinely a good night for Conservatives. It's actually off the scale of any of our expectations. We were sort of talking about what happens if we get up to 10 gains, and I see now the numbers are 11 gains. No overall gains for the Liberals, and Labour down massively by 13 councils. So, I mean, it's just a story that speaks for itself.
But I think this is a
great night.
I think it shows how low the expectations were for the Conservatives.
Well,
and remember the William Hague experience, 38%, hundreds of gains in 2000, total failure
I think in reality what it shows is that we are on our way back very convincingly. It actually puts the Liberal Democrats in difficulty because we're taking your vote share.
All right, let's go down to John Craig in Hammersmith and Fulham. John.
Well, Adam, the Labour Party have been telling me that, well, we won Lambeth back from the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition. That, as far as I know, is still a Labour claim. I'm not sure whether that is confirmed. But here we have seen the Conservatives give Labour an absolute mauling. There are... so far, most of the results are in. 32 Conservative candidates here, 5 Labour councillors. 32 Conservative councillors, 5 Labour councillors, 9 results still to come. That is a massive turnaround, and Labour haven't just been beaten here, they've been almost wiped out. And the outgoing leader of the council here, Stephen Burke, told me that the media headlines of the past 9 or 10 days undoubtedly were a big factor, and he said there was anger amongst Labour councillors and activists here. A big turnaround here. It's one, as we've been describing, of a number of Conservative gains here tonight. Here we are just down the road from Notting Hill, David Cameron's home patch. I can tell you that they've been popping the champagne corks here, loud cheers from the Tories as they celebrated their gains, and I can tell you that the Labour Party, the Labour councillors here, are a very demoralised and dispirited bunch, and as I've said, they are blaming their defeat partly on those dreadful headlines, the scandal involving John Prescott and the blunders of Charles Clarke.
Thank you very much indeed, John, and I had to put it to you, Jim Murphy. I mean, in 12 hours' time, I suspect what people will be talking about on the airwaves is Tony Blair. We've got Frank Dobson here repeating his view that the Prime Minister and his policies are a liability and that we need a party under new management.
Well, Frank's kind of had that view since he left the government. That might be coincidental, I don't know. But the polls I saw earlier on this evening, admittedly on another channel, was about
the ICM poll,
was about these issues, and I think it was a total of 45% of voters said they wanted the Prime Minister to stay the full length of this Parliament or beyond.
No, I think it was 23. Actually.
No, the combined figure was 25 to the end of the Parliament. I think 20 beyond that.
Right, okay.
Now, so there was 45%.
50% said they wanted him gone by the end of the year.
60% didn't want him in position in the first place. Yeah. So, I mean, Labour didn't even get 40% of the vote. So what I'm saying to you is that clearly the voters, quite rightly, have taken a lesson in respect of what's happened in the last 2 weeks.
Another piece of bad news for Labour. It's now confirmed that Labour have lost overall control of Camden. So seeing there, that's good news for Liberal Democrats, which I suppose makes up a bit for losing control of Milton Keynes, David Laws.
Can I just mention, coming back to Islington, I mean, the intelligence that I'm getting there is that we still have 50% of the seats, and we may have control on the casting vote of the mayor, but we're getting an update on that. Right. Can I also just mention on Jim's point that, I mean, Frank Dobson's comments are fairly predictable, but we shouldn't underestimate the effects on Labour of this big slide in the number of seats they had. In 1996, they had 11,000 councillors across the country. They're now going to have just over 6,000. that has a real effect, not only in those areas, but in their ability to turn the vote out in general elections.
And what about Milton Keynes?
Milton Keynes was very close, as you know before. It was only controlled by us with a majority of a couple, and we knew that that was going to be a very tough fight. I haven't got the latest figures on it. It's disappointing if we've lost it, but it was one where we only had a knife-edge majority.
But surely that's the story, that you're actually retreating and going backwards, by and large. And actually, for once, I
Let's
actually
see the
agree
result
with you,
in
Jim.
Richmond, where you're going to be going backwards, I suspect.
Actually, I agree with you, Jim, on this particular occasion. It really doesn't matter what happens to Tony Blair. The issue is not now Blair, it's the rottenness of this government through to its core. It doesn't matter whether it's Blair or Brown or whoever's in control.
I'm not sure, Grant.
It's actually the government that people want rid of.
I didn't say any or all of that, in case anyone's just turned the television on and said...
But this is a Prime Minister who... a few hours ago, we were talking to John Rentoul, his biographer, and by and large, a man who's been very supportive of the Prime Minister, simply saying that his power is draining away day by day, his authority is draining away, and there will possibly come a point where you may say Frank Dobson always says that, but where the Frank Dobsons will outnumber the strength of the Prime Minister, won't they?
Well, I didn't say Frank Dobson always said that. I just said Frank Dobson said that since the Prime Minister sacked him. Yeah. But the fact is that the Prime Minister and the Labour government was elected a year ago on a manifesto that which we're going to implement. And the Prime Minister made it clear he wouldn't stand for another election, but he would serve a full term.
But it's not
that would be his
it's not
intention.
just the Prime Minister's power that's draining away, it is the Labour parties. If you start with 11,000 councillors and lose almost half of them, that doesn't just affect one individual, it affects the whole capacity of a political party. And that's what the Tories saw before 1997, when their local government base was destroyed, and it had a huge impact on the national election.
OK, let's just recap now on the top stories with more than three-quarters of the results in the council elections across England look like this. This is the situation so far. The Conservative Party have gained over 200 seats. Labour have lost over 200 seats. The Liberal Democrats more or less flatlining. They are down 26, and there have been substantial gains by other parties, including the BNP, who have taken at least 11 out of 13 seats in Barking and Dagenham. And it has been a bad night for Labour around the country. The Conservative performances have been especially strong in London. They've won control of Hammersmith and Fulham for the first time since 1968. So far, Labour has lost, as we were saying, more than 200 seats. And there's also been those gains in Barking. And there is a recount for a possible 12th seat for the BNP in Barking Dagenham, or a dispute after that's been declared, I should say. There's a similar situation, although not involving the BNP, in Birmingham as well. Following tonight's poor results, the Prime Minister is expected to announce a cabinet reshuffle today. He's due to call ministers into Downing Street this morning to try to put a new team in place. So, which of the party leaders will be smiling tonight? Martin Stanford has the barometers, or should the word be thermometers, Martin?
You can't hear me? You can hear me. Hello, viewers. Right, good. What is it? 4:15 in the morning. The temperature gauge has gone wrong for Tony Blair. This was where we started. 1789 he had before the counting started. We said if it went down a little bit, he could get away with it. In truth, it's gone down to here. This is the result so far, and he's lost 217 seats as the update we had a moment ago. That's got to be bad news for Tony Blair. The other side of it was pressure on David Cameron to prove himself as the new Tory leader. And just 100 gains or something, that wouldn't have been very good for him. He was starting off with 1,497. And earlier today, we were saying he needed at least more than 100, maybe double that. And that's what he's got. Good progress, we mark him as, 213 net gains. So Mr Cameron's not only taken his party as leader into these elections, he can say that my leadership perhaps has inspired some local voting to go our way. For Sir Ming Campbell, well, he wanted to have a great successful evening as well, and his thermometer, it was hopefully in the positive territory. Right up here somewhere would be good news for him. As it's turned out, net Down 26 is what's happened for the Lib Dems so far. So a disappointing night for Sir Angus Campbell. Certainly of the three leaders, it's David Cameron who's got the biggest smile on his face.
Thank you, Martin. Well, one unofficial result coming in from the Liberal Democrats, which may put a little bit more of a smile on Sir Angus Campbell's face, reports that, as they predicted at the beginning of the evening, they've taken control of Richmond upon Thames here in London, and suggestions that Liberal Democrats could have made 17 gains. Nonetheless, Michael, as we look across London, it's the Conservatives who are the big winners.
Very, very much so. And you know, there's talk of them doing well in Ealing and Labour's majority there, not just in terms of on the council, but also in the wards that they control, indicates you know, a very big change in share of the vote. So no question that Labour is taking a pounding, particularly in the outer London boroughs. But in Islington, they've bounced right back. I mean, they've taken, they don't have overall control now. They've gained 13 seats from the Liberal Democrats. Liberal Democrats
it's
have
very
lost 14.
strange. Two adjacent boroughs there, Camden and Islington, going in completely opposite directions. Labour losing control in Camden, I think, for the first time in 30 years. And yet Islington, a slight recovery, although still no overall control.
Well,
there.
one could say that the Liberal Democrats overachieved in 2002. That would be, you know, put in a polite gloss on it from their point of view. Labour will say, well, we simply, you know, got over the shock of losing control in 2002, and we've bounced back. But as you rightly point out, in Sutton, the Liberal Democrats have lost seats. It now appears that they've gained seats in neighbouring Richmond. So there is very much a kind of, if you like, almost a distorted effect being caused by bespoke local campaigning, and either on the part of the Labour Party in places like Islington or on the part of the Liberal Democrats in Richmond, but it didn't work in Harringay.
Just to give you a recap on that result in Camden, there's one ward there which is being disputed, but Liberal Democrats are now the largest party with 20 seats, followed by Labour with 16, followed by the Conservatives with 13, and the Green Party have 2. And the reckoning, I think David Law's telling me right, is that we can expect a Lib Dem Conservative coalition there. Would that be right?
I haven't had an update on that particular, on the arrangements between the two parties, but that sounds quite a possibility. And coming back to the earlier point about these variations in London, I think we've seen from recent sets of local elections how voters can differentiate locally and how you'll sometimes get different results in different areas. But I think it's also worth saying that where you've got a council like Sutton, a Lib Dem council, where we had virtually every councillor on the entire council, that you can lose a small number of seats and still, as we are, remain in very strong control. But the result from Richmond, if it's confirmed, is a fantastic one for us and a really bad one for the Tories, because again, if they were expecting to come back against the Lib Dems, then they wouldn't be expecting to be toppled in places like Richmond, and it looks as if we've made 17 gains there, which would be fantastic.
I mean, it has to be said, Jim Murphy, I mean, that does seem to be a slight mood against incumbency. I mean, it doesn't matter which party it is.
Well, in terms of national mood, it's no surprise that the well-documented, well-publicised difficulties the government's had over the last 2 or 3 weeks are bound to play some part. And I think Tessa Joel and others have spoken about that already this evening. But one of the points that Michael has made, I think, is also a story of the evening, the way in which localised campaigns from different parties have enabled differential turnouts in different parts of the country and entirely counterintuitive results, where we have, as you say, Islington and Camden, outcomes facing different directions from boroughs that border one another. And that's the case across the country, where there's different results in neighbouring boroughs. And that's one of the stories of this evening, the way in which effective local campaigns can have an impact.
But it is also true that, I mean, there are some, but they're precious few councils where Labour have actually made gain.
Well, I think in London, for example, a number of the places where the Liberals have any influence, Labour has made some gains. As I said earlier, the result in Lambeth, possible change some of the trends in Southwark, the losses for the Liberals in Islington, and then additionally their failure to take Harringay, which was right at the top of the list of their priorities to take that seat, and they failed to do it this evening.
We made 11 gains, which we're pretty happy with, and in Lewisham and in Camden, 13 in both of those.
So you probably lost Lambeth and lost seats in Southwark.
Well, look, I think I'm in the privileged position of
Overall,
being the
a
only
pretty
one
strong
here
result.
who doesn't have to spin these results in any way. They are as they are. We have won 11 councils. You're exactly where you are with 0 net gains, and you're
But
massively
you're third in the
down.
metropolitan areas behind us, and you're making no
I'd
breakthrough in the
rather be
cities.
in our shoes tonight than yours, David.
These are pretty close to our best results.
I mean, what we're seeing so far, and I think we've now got most of London in, is that no, the Conservatives have gained 116 seats so far. That graphic is wrong. Labour have lost 116, and the Liberal Democrats have more or less held even at the moment. They've lost 13, but of course, if we got confirmed gains, then they might be more back to even Stevens.
Yes, but the graphic, albeit wrong, 116 gains for the Conservatives, and Labour's Achilles heel was always going to be London because of the potential.
We better sort this out. I mean,
to
we confidently think that the Conservatives have made more than 16 gains. Don't
yes,
we?
yes,
right.
we do.
So we think that graphic is wrong and it should be changed. Right.
Just going back to the point, it was always Labour's Achilles heel was London because of it's a 2002 result. The results in 2002 weren't too bad for Labour. Outside of London, we were comparing often with 2004 in the metropolitan boroughs, where it was an appalling set of results for Labour. Therefore, their potential to lose a lot of seats was very low. What's happened is that they've lost around about 150 seats before the London results kicked in, and now they've accelerated in terms of their losses. Labour isn't even trying to defend those kinds of losses, nor are they trying to sort of salvage anything out of the fact that they've lost these councils. And a large part of London is now blue, whereas it used to be either no or control or Labour. They're not denying it, and they're right not to deny it, because you can't argue with the fact that the Conservative national share of the vote is around about that psychological important barrier of 40%.
Now let's just talk about London, though, in terms of its overall political importance. I mean, obviously, when you talk about Greater London, I think you're talking about more than 10 million people, so it's a significant voting bloc. But what is its relationship to other parts of the country in terms of, is it a weather vane, for example?
Well, no, in the sense that what happened in the 2005 general election is that Labour's vote hemorrhaged more in London than any other region in the country. So, in other words, these local elections were simply waiting to happen. We'd already been given a signal that Labour's vote was declining rapidly, and there may well be demographic factors to account for that change in Labour's vote in the capital compared with other regions of the country. The fact that maybe the demographics mean that the kinds of people that are now living in London are perhaps more affluent than in other regions, and with that affluence comes a change in voting habits, which we're seeing again tonight. So these results simply endorse what we found at the 2005 general election. They're not surprising results. They merely confirm that general pattern of London swinging against Labour.
How important do you think London is? Obviously very important.
It is very important. I mean, London's always the one that you have to win if you're going to win a general election. I don't think any government's ever not won London and won a general election in recent sort of decades. So it's vital. But actually, it's also encouraging that we're making progress in the Midlands, Birmingham, and those 4 out of the 7 Met councils in the West Midlands that we've picked up. And we are starting to make some gains in council seat terms in places like
But you've still got a big, I mean, as Jim Murphy was saying, I mean, in the north of England, Scotland, Wales, still got a very long way to go.
Absolutely, and we would not argue with that at all. I mean, but what's happened here is this has demonstrated that David Cameron's made a great start, that by being a sensible, mainstream, moderate party with sort of a positive future outlook for Britain, we can make progress, and that in itself is a huge psychological benefit for us to know that that's a great platform to run.
You rightly point to London, you rightly point to the West Midlands, but you're not talking about the North West, Yorkshire, the North East. And we haven't had elections tonight in Scotland or in Wales, so that you are still more or less trapped in this kind of bottom right-hand corner of the country.
Yeah, and we want to represent the entire country, but we recognise you have to start somewhere. And actually, a very good place to start is the capital, where we've been, behind Labour for many years.
Well, actually, you won the popular share of the vote in London at the last election, so you weren't behind Labour for many years, and you also took 11 seats at the last general election in London. Labour lost 11 seats in the last general election in London, so you haven't been behind for many years.
Yes, but it's not enough, is it?
But you weren't behind for many years.
And this is good progress.
The last time we had elections in London, you won the elections in terms of the popular share of the vote, so it's not true, Grant, that you've been behind for many years. But the basic point is that you cannot win a general election in the United Kingdom if you have one seat in Scotland, very little representation in Wales, and not winning it anywhere in this sort of Manchester.
And for the Conservatives, this is 1 or 2% up on William Hague's share of the vote in the year 2000.
It is 2%.
And this point about the Conservatives not being in the major cities of England, not having major representation in Scotland and Wales, I mean, that is a massive transformation from the Conservative position when they were back in government. And I think it demonstrates just how far away they are.
Hold on a minute.
Grant, you're the only party out of the three of us who is in that situation.
Hold on a minute.
You're a very regional party in that sense.
Hold on a minute. For one thing, I mean, you guys, in a sense, are actually representing my point of view here, which is this is a great start, and tonight has undoubtedly been excellent. I mean, Labour's lost 220 seats. We've gained roughly 220 seats. You've lost about 26 seats. So we're the ones who've moved forward quite clearly. But if what both of you are saying is we still have a long way to go, then I absolutely agree, and we recognise that as a party. But this has been a great start.
David Cameron, since he took over, has been trying to take the Conservatives, understandably, back to being a party of national government. He's taking some support from Labour, but he's not succeeded in eating into the Liberal Democrats. And we are still in a three-party situation.
Well,
and I think that's the challenge that the Conservatives haven't been able to deal with.
I expected that to be the story of this evening, but actually I'm struck by just how little you guys have made any impact, and how we have, in fact, eaten into quite a lot of your vote.
But I think you'd agree we are in three-party politics very clearly here. I mean, any party getting above 20% of the vote, which has clearly gone on, compared to where the Liberal Democrats were, means that they haven't gone away, they haven't been squeezed in spite of Mark Oaten and Simon Hughes and Charles Kennedy and all that. And so, in that sense, it may not be a progress, but
the Lib Dems have been around for way more than a century. These guys are resilient. We already know that. But the point is here, under their brand new leader, they've made absolutely no progress. In fact, they've slipped backwards, and that simply means that the swing has been direct in terms of seat changes from Labour down 220 to Conservative up 220, and Lib Dems doing absolutely nothing.
Let's be clear that consolidates us at what was, apart from 1 year, the best set of results in the history of the party.
I love these
and it's
programmes.
That David Cameron has to succeed.
I love these programmes. The three of us claim it's a
really, I'm the only one who can claim it tonight.
We've got about another half hour to go, and then by then you'll all have won. Let's just recap on the top stories at just after 4:30 a.m. With more than three-quarters of the results in the council elections across England, it has been a bad night for Labour, with net losses of more than 200 seats. Conservative performance has been especially strong in London, where they've gained control of 4 councils, including Hammersmith and Fulham, for the first time since 1968. In Barking in East London, the BNP has picked up 11 seats, though, as we've been hearing, at least one further seat is being disputed. Following tonight's results, the Prime Minister is expected to announce a cabinet reshuffle today. Ministers are likely to be summoned to Downing Street this morning as a new team is put together. So it was a bruising night for Labour and for the Prime Minister. Sky News political correspondent Glenna Glazer's got the story of the last few hours.
A bad night for Labour and for Tony Blair's authority. With his party losing more than 200 council seats, the Prime Minister is expected to announce a cabinet reshuffle later today.
People are concerned about areas where we have not been performing as well as we should have done, for example, in relation to the Home Office issues that have arisen over the last 2 or 3 weeks. People are quite legitimately concerned to see change there.
A good night for the Conservatives and a vindication, his supporters say, of David Cameron's approach to changing the image and priorities of his party.
We're getting some pretty grotty results coming through for Labour, and we see a cabinet in complete disarray, becoming an object, by and large, of public ridicule. And this is the new Labour project is going down the great slipway of life at the moment. It's a mess.
The Liberal Democrats were hoping to make significant gains, but are pointing out that they were starting from a high base.
The real goal is to really make sure that it's clear to everybody that three-party politics are here to play. Because what we find when we go out on the doorstep is the one issue that holds people back from voting for us is if they don't think we can win.
As widely predicted, the BNP took several council seats in the previously solid Labour heartland of Barking and Dagenham.
I therefore declare that Robert William Bailey, John Davis and Claire Louisa Doncaster are duly elected for the ward of Aliban.
So Tony Blair's reaction to what has been a pretty dreadful night for Labour, an imminent cabinet reshuffle, an attempt to close the book on those awful news stories of the last few weeks, which have been reflected in these council election results. All eyes will be on the fate of John Prescott and of Charles Clarke. But why have a reshuffle so soon?
Well, look, this reshuffle is an attempt to cover up very bad losses for Tony Blair and Labour in the local elections and very good results for David Cameron and the Conservative Party. We've had a fantastic night, gained councils we've never controlled before, and a reshuffle is not going to hide the bad news for Tony Blair.
We were told to expect a reshuffle on Monday, and then last night it gradually became tomorrow, i.e. Friday, today. So that does look a bit panicky. It's meant, I think, to show sort of dynamism and grip and a determination to hang on to power, but Mr. Blair's not got a particularly good reputation for organising reshuffles well.
This could be Tony Blair's last major reshuffle. Part of what he's promised will be a smooth and orderly transition of power to a new Prime Minister. Glenn O'Glaser, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, that's the story in words and pictures. Martin Stanford has the story of local election night in figures and also what it would mean for the House of Commons.
Yeah, it would mean all change in the House of Commons if last night was typical, but we'll come to that in a minute. Let's give you these statistics as we've got them so far. This is the state of the parties. Net changes then we've got here. Conservatives now got 62 councils, gain of 11 on the night. Labour, there you are, giving them away, 13 losses, just 23 councils now. Liberal Democrats on 10. No real change. Disappointment for the Liberal Democrats on that kind of figure. They would have hoped for better. No overall control. The net gain is 2 on that certain. If we change the scorecard to the actual seats, the councillors who have been elected overnight, Conservatives nearly 3,000 now, up 233. And we set the rubric, we set the standard as 100 gains would be automatic, or certainly would be something that they would hope to expect, and they could have been more or less reassured they've done better than double that. Similarly, 100 losses, net losses, was something that the Labour Party was holding their hands up and saying that is probably going to happen. What's happened is more than double that. Loss of 230 council seats net for the Labour Party. The Liberal Democrats, net loss of 33. For the other parties, a net gain of 30. And we'll see how that pans out in London in just a moment or so. Let's give you the other statistics. In terms of share of the seats, voting difficult to compare just at the moment without all the hard numbers in. But in terms of share of the seats, this gives you a sense of the Tory success against the Labour less successful night. 40.4 for the Tories, 31.4 for Labour, 22.2 for Lib Dems. The other parties, the 6%. How has that changed since the last time these local elections were fought on a comparative basis? Well, this is it, isn't it? They've sort of swapped. Labour have given this 3.2% jump to the Tories, 3.2% loss to Labour. Liberal Dems, well, statistically 0.5 doesn't matter too much, and the other parties barely changing as well. Now, although this was just part of the electorate, it was only parts of England, although a significant part of it. There was no Scotland, no Wales, no Northern Ireland involved in yesterday. We have taken the voting intentions as we've measured them in wards up and down the country and done the extrapolation of what might happen if that kind of voting was repeated in the House of Commons. And this is what you get. You get a government now made up of the Conservatives, 328 seats in our latest extrapolation. This is our latest prediction of what would happen. The Labour Party would reduce to 323 members of the House of Commons. And look at this figure for the Lib Dems, treading water really, roughly where they are now at 63. The other parties would have a further 32 2 MPs to add to the mix. So we'd have a Conservative government, and they would have not a huge, but workable majority of 10. Adam?
Well, so from earlier projections, as London comes in, the Conservative position strengthens. Should say another result from London. You see there on the bottom of your screen, Conservatives have gained Croydon. Well, that was one of the more marginal ones. Not a surprise there, but so it's a strong finish in London as far as the results are concerned.
It certainly is, and that's really boosting the Conservative Party now, because they're not only gaining councils, which is one of the headlines, they're gaining quite a lot of seats from Labour. So it's taking both of the parties to the 250 mark, which, if you remember from our earlier graphic some hours ago, this is a miserable night for Labour.
That was the sort of panic button.
It was the panic button. It's a thoroughly miserable night for Labour and the Prime Minister, but it's one that they were absolutely expecting. It's a very good night indeed for the Conservatives, but one that I don't think that they were necessarily expecting. They were hoping for, but not necessarily expecting it. And of course, in terms of the House Commons projection, our earlier one said it was going to be a hung parliament with the Conservatives tantalisingly short of a majority. This latest one is, if you like, reflecting the strength of the Conservative vote in London, because it's these London results that are now coming in and changing our projection quite dramatically in terms of the headline figure. The Conservative majority is rather better than Conservative largest party in our
We've now got Conservative net gains of 36. I have to say, I still don't understand that.
Me also.
Because the changes should totalise to 0.
And they're clearly not. I think there's a digit missing from the Conservatives. But we've seen in terms of the councils that they've gained control of Bexley, of Croydon, of Hammersmith. They failed to take Milton, which did surprise me, but they gained Harrow, Hillingdon. So they've done extremely well in the capital, and that's certainly an important boost to the party.
Right. OK. Jim Murphy, if you look at this projection, it's talking about well over 100 of your colleagues losing their seats if it was a general election last night. I mean, that is the sort of thing that puts panic into professional politicians, isn't it?
Well, there wasn't a general election last night, that's absolutely clear. And I think the figures in terms of the vote share that you yourself have and that others have is that there was a 1% swing from 2004 from Labour to the Conservatives. So it's a 1% swing in the populist share of the vote from 2004. It isn't in the territory of a change of government. Not even the Conservative Party are actually claiming that with any credibility. The fact is that they still cannot make breakthroughs in major parts of the United Kingdom and in some countries, indeed, of the United Kingdom, in some great cities of England. So the Conservatives this evening have made some progress, yes, but it's 2% up on what William Hague achieved. William Hague is a decent man, but he was a laughingstock as a leader. And this evening, the Conservatives this evening have achieved 2% more than that really dreadful threshold that William Hague had. And it's not a reason to celebrate an impending change of government. Yes, it's a disappointing night for Labour, of course, in this respect. Much of it expected in light of the last couple of weeks' headlines, of course.
I mean, Jim doesn't seriously think we're in the same position as we were when William Hague was in power just after Conservatives had lost in 19...
You're 2% better off.
Just after Conservatives was lost in 1997. It's a completely different ballgame now. What this indicates is we've got a new leader in David Cameron who's actually gone on a very, very positive agenda. One of the really nice things about this election actually was that there was nothing in what we were saying which was negative at all. He went out, he demonstrated the fact that if you voted blue you get more green. He went to Norway, he showed what was happening in the environment. Those are many of the issues that concern people on the doorstep.
Publicly pretty negative on the health service and on the performance of the Home Office.
Well, you know, you've got to...
That was negative, hold on. Just for the record.
Hold on, an opposition actually absolutely has to hold the government to account, but the point is we didn't start running silly, commercials in terms of the election broadcasts, which sort of slammed the other side and got very personal and did all that sort of stuff. And frankly, Jim, and I know you're very proud of that commercial, and I thought it was very funny, but it completely has backfired on you as a party, because people in this country want positive vision for the future of the country. That's what David Cameron's actually demonstrated here, and it's worked very, very well in terms of electoral gains.
Where you're wrong in respect to your own party is William Hague's record at 38% wasn't directly after 97, it was the year 2000, 3 years after it. So you've made a breakthrough. It's less than 2% more than William Hague achieved.
Can I say that it's clearly...
He not only visited Norway, he also visited Manchester.
Okay, it's clear that tonight is a very bad night for Labour. There's no denying that for them.
Conservatives.
However, I think it's a fool's paradise for the Tories. I mean, David Cameron may have been to Norway. He should have tried Sheffield. He should have tried Liverpool, Manchester. That's where there's been no progress. And in terms of us, I mean, I understand that we're now getting some vote shares through overall, and what they show is that we were probably 1% in advance of the Labour Party, a percent or so off our best ever set of results. And that demonstrates that three-party politics are here to stay. But David Cameron is not being successful in the end.
Any government is formed by building coalitions, and that's the reason for aggregating performances. And if we look at your performance, there seems to be several factors. One is that momentum is not with you tonight. Momentum has been with the Conservatives. And the other issue, which I agree is a small issue, but 1 or 2%, there seems to be traffic net from the Liberal Democrats to other parties. Now, that can't be good news.
This has been a good night for us against Labour, and this is only the second time in our history in which we've come second as share of the vote in the local elections. You said that
let's be very careful about that. I mean, it takes Michael, I think, some weeks to calculate share of the vote.
Well, that is the projection so far.
Do you believe the Liberal Democrats have come second in terms of share of the votes?
Michael, the BBC are projecting that the Liberals will come third.
No, actually, not tonight.
No, the BBC are predicting that Liberals have come third. I'm sorry to say that on Sky.
On Liberal.
No, well, he's agreeing.
No, I am agreeing with that. We have them in third place. Yes. So it's down. 2003, our projection was that the Lib Dems got 27. 2004, our projection was that they got 27. And we're now saying that on the results that we've got so far, it's lower tonight. And that shows in terms of the fact that in terms of councils gain and net losses, or it's even Stevens, and in terms of seats, it's more or less even Stevens.
BBC estimate is saying 27. I mean, Adam, you talked about
the BBC estimate is traditionally large.
Yeah. Adam, you talked about governments, requiring the formation of coalitions.
This man is the Bible on this. I really wouldn't argue with this man.
Why don't the three of us could just leave and you two can discuss it all?
He is traditionally right, but I mean, I don't want to labour this point. I do want you to concede, David Laws, there is no momentum with the Liberal Democrats tonight.
I would love it if we had made greater gains, but we have consolidated at the best level in our party's history. And you said that governments require to pull together coalitions in order to govern. What David Cameron has been trying to do in a naked way over the last 6 months, year, is to pull together a coalition by not only pulling apart Labour, but by pulling apart the Lib Dem vote. And he is failing to do that. That demonstrates that we're in three-party politics, and we're far more likely after the next general election to end up with a hung parliament than we are with a Conservative government or a Labour government.
And if we do get a hung parliament, are we more likely to get a Lib-Con coalition or a Lib-Lab coalition?
I've no idea. That is speculation. That is speculation.
What's your personal take?
Even that at 5
look, you've just pushed us into this hung parliament speculation. I'm saying, where would you like to be in
that will depend on two things. That will depend on, firstly, what the result of the election is, which even I am not predicting, and secondly, it will depend upon the policies of parties, and I certainly can't predict what David Cameron's policy is.
Well, all right. Well, perhaps if we get away from notional percentages and all the rest of it, we might just have a look at councils which have changed hands this evening, because in a sense, if you live around the country, that's the important story. Have you got different people running your dustbin service this morning than you had yesterday? And here they are. These are the Liberal Democrat gains. They gained St Albans and they gained South Lakeland, which I presume is in Cumbria somewhere, is it, Michael?
It is indeed,
right.
Adam.
OK. Let's have a look now at the Conservative gains, rather longer. Conservatives, and you can see who they gained them from on the right of the screen. They gained Shrewsbury, Bassetlaw, Chorley, Hastings and Coventry for no overall control, and Crawley from the Labour Party. They also gained Waveney, Mole Valley, Bexley, Hillingdon and Croydon. This is a summary of Labour losses, of course, many of them going to no overall control. Newcastle, Stoke, Derby, Bury, Redditch, Barrow, Warrington, Crawley, as we've heard, Plymouth, Bexley, Lewisham, Merton and Croydon. And so, Michael, if you look at those outside London, what grabs your attention there?
Well, I should really talk about Plymouth. Labour's lost control in Plymouth, and for Labour to lose control there, it would require a huge swing against it. And I think it really reinforces the picture outside of London, and even within London, there's been some evidence of this, that in some areas the voters have said about the incumbent party, we don't like the incumbent party. And, so Labour have lost control of Plymouth, and elsewhere the Conservatives have lost control, the Liberal Democrats have lost control in Islington and
well, I mean, let's return to that theme. We showed you what the Conservatives gained. They did actually lose control of a couple of councils in Lindsay and Hart, West Lindsay and Hart. And we showed you two gains by the Liberal Democrats. Those are the councils they lost control of, Islington and Milton Keynes.
To no overall control. So it's very much a kind of... there are two stories, big stories here. One is the national momentum that's clearly favoured the Conservatives. I won't really brook too much argument with that. But then there are many other local stories where the swing against parties has been in opposite directions.
Well, let's have a look at the London map and of tonight, and perhaps in a moment we'll be able to compare it with what the London map was before. But I mean, what you notice immediately there is that there's very little red on the map indeed.
Well, there's still quite a number of inner London boroughs to declare at them, but there's no doubt that the Conservatives have swept up around the outer fringes of London. In some boroughs we'd expect them to do that, in others it's been a fairly dramatic performance.
We see Camden there in the middle of that grey spot going to no overall control, probably the biggest loss. Let's just have a look at what the councils were when we started out this evening, and clearly we're seeing a red tide being pushed back there. That's what it was at the start of the evening, and we can have a look at what it is now.
So red turns to blue, but that's, if you like, almost a traditional picture of how London used to look in the strong days of the Conservatives. The outer areas very much Conservative, the inner areas where Labour was strong. Of course, the Liberal Democrats have made an entry there, but there's still quite a long way to go in terms of the count in London. There's at least 10 London boroughs to declare yet, and of course the story could deteriorate further.
Okay, Michael, I know you can't do this precisely, but overall, what sort of swings are we seeing tonight?
It's in terms of the general election, Adam. I mean, the Conservatives have got around about a 12-point lead over Labour, which suggests a swing of around about 6 to 7% from Labour to the Conservatives, enough to give the Conservatives a narrow overall victory. But again, these are local elections. We haven't finished the evening. No. These are local elections. The Tories will say this is a great result for them. Labour will say it's, we expect this at this period of the Parliament, and of course at the real election this won't happen. And the Liberal Democrats are clearly saying, well, we've still got the momentum with us.
And again, if we look at the net gains and losses in terms of seats, and everyone would have seen charts on Sky News and in their newspapers of that, by the end of the evening, well, indeed, it's going to be tomorrow lunchtime, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what sort of order of gains are we looking at? I mean, that's the figure now.
I think we're currently showing around about 230 in favour of the Conservatives, around the similar number for Labour. This is at the end of miserable for Labour and pleasure for the Conservatives. This is a good night for the Conservatives.
But that's so far. I mean, I'm just saying, by the end of the night, what sort of figure?
It's very difficult to say, Adam. I really, I can't say, in terms of which boroughs.
Pushing towards 300?
No, I don't think it will get towards
250.
It's certainly going to get to 250, I would say.
OK, there we have...
Because there will be losses in areas such as Richmond, where we've taken those seats off the Tories.
We would bring you Richmond if we had
I thought I'd mention that.
I just had to apologise. We don't happen to have the result of Richmond. I don't even know if they're counting tonight, are they?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, that's where we think we've taken control off the Tories with a 17 gains.
Well, if it was that dramatic. OK, final thoughts. David Laws.
Final thoughts are we have managed to consolidate at close to our best ever level. Three-party politics are here to stay. Very bad night for Labour, but dangerous for the Conservatives to get into this fool's paradise of thinking these results are fantastic when they don't exist in the metropolitan areas and much of the north of the country.
We appreciate David's health warning. We don't want to be complacent, but it's a fantastic evening for us. We've gained 239 seats so far, 12 councils up. I happen to think Ealing might come in for us as well. It hasn't been declared as yet. So, I mean, it's right off. I've got here the sort of ready reckoner of where we thought the results might be, and this is actually off the scale. We haven't even thought about something in this region. It's a fantastic night. Positive politics.
Murphy.
Well, it was always going to be a difficult night. Every commentator and every politician realised that it would be difficult for Labour in light of mid-term, record third term, the difficulties of the last couple of weeks, of course. In terms of the other parties, the Conservatives have made some progress in their seats gained, but they're nowhere near.
Bad nights, though.
Well, the wilder predictions were 400 and 500 in the papers, but the Conservatives
Thank you all very much indeed. That is all from Vote 06, although of course Sky News stays on air for all the council results as they come in throughout the day and for that expected cabinet reshuffle tomorrow.